Time now for the international newspapers here on France 24. Elena's with us as ever, and you're starting with the Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour. They're unimpressed with Bashar al-Assad's speech yesterday in Syria.
They are indeed. They've got a pretty impressive front page, headlined "Assad fails the oral test again." They've got a cartoon of the president strangling a battered and wounded-looking demonstrator while saying, "What do you say we talk about national reconciliation?" So their viewpoint here is pretty clear. They say Assad could hardly have given a worse speech. They say he gave no ground whatsoever to protesters and accused the demonstrators of being products of a foreign conspiracy. Inside the paper, they interview an analyst who says Bashar could hardly have done more to stir up the growing discontent. He says the president is trying to buy time, but actually he's shortening the amount of time left available to him by provoking more and more anger. But that doesn't necessarily mean the end of the regime is in sight, the paper says. After all, his father suppressed protesters violently for 3 years between 1979 and 82, and this is only the third month of this repression, so it could go on for much, much longer. The Guardian, also headlining on Syria today, in analysis inside, they say that Assad is following exactly in the same steps as Ben Ali and Mubarak, who both gave speeches which could have used the same script, which also upset protesters in those countries, of course. He also seems to be reading off exactly the same page as Gaddafi, who said he called the protesters vermin, as you probably remember. Assad called the ones in Syria germs yesterday. So
similar language, isn't it?
It's really almost exactly the same language. That's what the Guardian's pointing up today. And we'll have yet to see if he will go the same way as Mubarak and Ben Ali, they ask.
OK, another story we've talked a lot about in the last couple of days is Afghanistan, the admission that the US has been talking to the Taliban. The International Herald Tribune, they're talking about the fact that they believe a big sort of part of the NATO strategy is failing.
Yes, they're talking about NATO's biggest and best financed programme in Afghanistan, which is the programme to get Taliban fighters to leave and reintegrate into normal society. They're given $150 each for agreeing to give up being Taliban, and their government is meant to be finding them ordinary jobs. Now, this was launched 10 months ago with great fanfare, but it's only had 1,700 people take it up out of perhaps 40,000 Taliban in the country. They weren't very high ranking. The paper says they're mostly from the north of the country, whereas the insurgency is stronger in the south. And there's also quite a number of double agents. That's people who say that they're leaving the Taliban, they take the money, but actually they're just infiltrating the Afghan army so they can then spy for the Taliban. There's also plenty of people who take that $150 and then disappear. So the paper says they may well have gone back to the Taliban. They're not keeping track of where they've gone. And the Afghan government has got to take some of the responsibility for this, the International Herald Tribune thinks, because they're not helping those people who have given up being Taliban to reintegrate into society. They're not helping them get jobs. So many of them go back to the insurgency purely out of poverty.
Now, one story the business team have been talking about a lot today, the Walmart class action. That's in the papers as well, isn't it?
Yes, let's look at the American feminist blog Jezebel, which is very upset about this. This, of course, is the Supreme Court's decision that over 1 million women can't file a case for employment discrimination against Walmart as a class action. Now, they judged basically that there couldn't be a class that was discriminated against unless there was a written discrimination policy. And Jezebel points out that makes future class actions for harassment or discrimination almost impossible. It says, ladies, you're on your own now. The police points out that all managers may well be prey to unconscious bias, especially if they're all men, and the corporate culture is very masculine. So there's no need for a written policy in order for there to be discrimination.
And the last thing he pulled out, Washington Post, they're going to explain to us why they think, not us, why they think, some right-wing politicians go out of their way to upset people.
Yes, they're saying that politicians like Michelle Bachmann, for example, make particularly strong or even offensive remarks because it attracts donations. It says the politician blurts out something incredibly controversial, the remark bounces around blogs and talk shows, and the politician's staffers are taking the calls and raking in the money. Michelle Bachmann, for example, her campaign took $1 million just very shortly after she accused President Obama of having anti-American views. Now, the paper says these candidates are timing their outbursts for maximum financial impact. Bachmann, for example, said that President Obama was turning the US into a nation of slaves during a debate which was also prominently calling for donations through conservative website The Drudge Report. So it's all about the money, the Washington Post says.
OK, I wonder if it works for salaries. Perhaps we should start being a bit more controversial, saying some nasty things on it. No, we wouldn't do that. Elena,
I'm not
thank you
trying
very
to encourage
much.
you to do that, Stuart.
I think it was very sensible. Elena, thanks very much. Elena, we're here with the international papers as ever.